always go get money when you don't need it.
If you don't know your numbers, you're going to get burned. And
everyone is a click away from your competitor.
You got to find a new agency.
It just makes the decision so much easier.
What are your secrets to scale? On today's episode of E-commerce Secrets to Scale, I have Matt Putra, founder of 8X, which is a fractional CFO firm for e-commerce brands, on the show to talk about cash flow and what you as a brand should be doing to make sure you have healthy cash flow at all times to ultimately just achieve profitability in a time where profitability is really kind of hard to come by. Knowing your numbers is really, really key. And Matt shares a ton of valuable insights that I'm positive will help you on your journey. So let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show, Matt. Super excited to have you, man. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Matt. I'm a fractional CFO. I work almost exclusively for e-commerce brands in Canada, USA, a bit in Europe, and a bit in Australia. And really what we do is try to help people get to where they want to go. So most brands come to us and they're like, hey, we're doing this. We want to go up to here. And we want to exit. And that's typically what I see. And our job is to help them get there without running out of money, try to limit the amount of stress, try to give stable cash flows as much as possible. We help them manage their marketing spend. We help them figure out, hiring, planning, all that kind of stuff.
We were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I was like, you don't really hear about fractional CFOs that much. Like the fractional CMO is like pretty commonly known, but how much of a need is that right now since the economy kind of took a turn?
I would suggest that anybody over sort of 2 to 3 million a year in revenue would really benefit from a fractional CFO. You can find services that are affordable at that size. You would pay less than like an average sort of full-time, low-level staff member. You'd get someone who was quite experienced, who knows what they're doing, and they will help you with a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people that aren't finance people, and that's okay because we need the creatives to run the world, and we just got to help everybody stay on the rails, I guess, right? So yeah, I would say, look, I really recommend it because even when it comes to communicating with an agency, so you own an agency, so you've probably seen this. You go, hey, what do you want to do with your year? And they may not be able to answer that question as effectively as you would like, so that you really know where you can work. Well, we can help bridge the gap there. So these are the guardrails for you, and this is what we want to see, and here's these metrics and that metrics. And so then you're empowered as an agency owner to serve them even better as well. And then they know that their agency is sort of on track and on budget. And so then everybody's happier, I feel, when there's some financial kind of stuff in place.
E-commerce, specifically D2C e-commerce, is very much a game of numbers, right? If you don't know your numbers, you're going to get burned. And we're seeing a lot of that happening, unfortunately, in the industry with some of these closures and bankruptcies. But had they had, proper forecasting and really known their like marketing efficiency and what they could afford to spend and all that, like there's a good chance that may have been avoided.
Are you familiar with the concept of contribution margin?
Yes.
Yeah. So I did a couple of reviews lately of some brands that came to me sort of asking just for like a quick review. And what I noticed was their contribution margin was negative. And so what that means is that every dollar they sell, they lose more money. And so they didn't know until I talked to them. And of course, that you see the eyes open wide and they're like, well, what do I do? And well, there are things you can do, but that's why even if you just get just pay for an audit from a CFO or whatever, and then you get some information you can use. So I would say it's something's needed. Yeah.
Yeah. At least kind of where you sit and if you need to kind of change course. But yeah, like brands out there that aren't really paying attention to contribution margin, like the more you sell, the more you're like actually heading down a bad path and you might not actually make it. So like maybe pull back on some of the things that you're spending on.
Yeah. And so they ask, what's the break even revenue? And I'm like, well, there is none, because literally the next dollar you sell, you're going to lose 10 cents. So there's no possible break even. And like I say, there's things you can do. And I'll also say that what I've seen this past maybe even 6 months is that a lot of agencies are getting more sophisticated as well, because you've probably seen this, they've realized that with the financial discipline, like you actually get more room to play, not less. And so like the fact that contribution margin says a lot about you, and someone should feel good about working with you because you know what that means. And so when you look for agencies, look for people that understand contribution margin and budgeting and all that.
Knowing your numbers and knowing how profitable you are, even down to like daily, is huge.
Totally. Yeah.
And, if your agency is not paying attention to the numbers and like sharing that transparency with your P&L, you got to find a new agency. I'm sorry. Like back in the Wild West days of, post pandemic, everything was great, right? You didn't need to pay attention to profitability that much because there was always tomorrow or you're going to sell more. But things have quickly changed, and it's more important than ever to make sure that you're partnering with people that actually care about profitable growth. And it's in everyone's best interest, like you said, to make sure that that's happening, because as an agency, like I don't want to set my client on a bad path to the point where like they can't afford to pay my retainer, let alone like can't pay their employees or their suppliers and everything, right? But I'm going a little bit out of order than I normally do. Tell me a little bit more about your background. How did you ultimately like become a fractional CFO? What's your story?
I've done a lot of things in my life, and at some point I realized accounting is what I want to do, and that's going to be the way for me to kind of make my mark on the world. And I wanted to be a CFO, and so I was like 27, and I went back and finished my bachelor's, and then anyway, flash forward to I was 32. I got picked up by a private equity group as their CFO. So I was there for 5 years or so, doing deals, investments, and kind of watching these companies operate and watching the numbers, and then of course managing the private equity company, the parent company, right? And I loved it. It was one of my favorite jobs ever. And then, but I was commuting from my suburb to downtown Vancouver, Canada, and it was 3 hours commute time a day. And so basically, I missed dinners with my kids for about 2 years straight. So COVID happened, and I got all this time back, and I got dinner, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go back to this no seeing my kids until like late at night. And so then I decided to split off on my own. And I started working for a couple of friends first. And then the word kind of got out, and I worked for a couple more people, and I went quite slow in the beginning just to make sure that A, I liked it, and B, that I was able to provide value as the business grows. And now we serve like 25 clients, and we have 20 staff, and we're really trying to help people figure their shit out. Yeah.
What made working for the private equity company so fun?
Oh,
just the fact that you had some diversity and got to see like all the different portfolio companies.
There was a lot of things. Yeah, man. So there was the diversity in work that we were doing, and we worked all across Canada, and we were sort of actually like a socially minded PE group. So we did things like we would invest in housing that could be affordable to people. And what we would do is we would cap our return so that because when we're not taking out as much as we can, we're able to leave money in there to keep it affordable. So that was really cool. I got to wake up in the morning and make a positive impact. The team I worked with was just wonderful. The managing directors were just like the best people. And I just learned a ton, worked with some really wonderful colleagues. I'm still in touch with them, and did good work from the country. I spent like Canada, like trying to help Canadians like live affordably. So that was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's not too often you hear of a private equity group trying to make a difference in the world, right?
Oh, not too much.
So today we're talking about cash flow. You understand financials for e-com businesses on a very deep level, and I'm really excited to dig into that. So from a cash flow perspective, I mean, what are brands struggling with? Like, what are the common issues that they're facing unless they have someone on their side like you to help them understand it?
Yeah. So, I mean, every brand, typically the three biggest expenses are inventory, ad spend, and staff are usually the three biggest ones. And so if we start with inventory, something that I've seen is people buying too much inventory and people continuing to purchase SKUs to sell that have a very low rate of sale. And so if you can imagine that every time you buy a piece of inventory, it's a stack of cash on a shelf. Well, they're putting cash on shelf that doesn't come off for 6 months or 9 months because it's slow moving. What you want to do in an ideal world is to put the bag of cash on the shelf and it comes off 30 days later because you get it back because you sold it. So that's one big one. I worked with somebody. So someone came to me, this was 2022. Yeah, late 2022. And they'd lost multi 6-figure losses in the past 2 years, and they were working on fixing their supplier cost of goods sold. So they had sort of successfully done that. We fixed their marketing, and then we fixed their supplier negotiations and a bunch of stuff. So now they've got like 30-day terms with the Chinese supplier. The Chinese supplier actually produces surplus inventory that they don't charge them for in case there's a spike in demand. So there's a bunch of things that you do with inventory. First and foremost, try to get to a cost of goods sold that's like 30% would be. I used to say, 40 to 50 is okay, but 30 really now for e-commerce, given how much you have to spend to acquire customers, 30% is really what I would call a scalable margin. 40 can work if you have to. So 30. Then from there, it's like payment timelines. So when you're new, you're not going to get terms with your supplier. You're just not, and that's fine. So do the dance. But as you begin to grow, continue having conversations with your supplier. So once every 3 months, call them up and say, hey, we've been paying you on time and everything. Can I have like 5 extra days to pay? Okay, that's not a big ask, and it's easy for them to say yes to. So good, now pay on that 5 days every time. Then 3 months later, go, hey, you know what? Like I've been paying you for time. Can I have another 5 days, or can I have 10 days? Again, very small ask. And this concept is called nibbles. A good friend of mine taught me this, named Kevin. And it's called nibbles. And so take nibbles every quarter and show that you're going to commit to what you said you'd do, but then ask for another thing. So, hey, look, you've given me 10 days. Thank you so much. Can I reduce the deposit from 30% to 25 now? Again, small ask, easy to say yes to, but continue to have the conversation.
How are brands like talking their manufacturers or suppliers into like storing surplus product for them? Like, how have you seen that played out?
I'll give you this specific example. So first we took a bunch of nibbles. So can we reduce the deposit? Can we pay just a little bit later? Can we reduce the deposit a little bit more? So we did all that, right? And can you cost engineer the materials? And so that was all done. Then the next level of sophistication is forecasting and sales planning. So of course, when you work with the CFO, you get quite disciplined demand plans and all that kind of stuff. So then what we would do next is we'd pipe this to the supplier and we'd say, hey, this is how we see the next quarter or 2 quarters shaping out. If you give us a bit better terms, or if you hold some safety stock, I can actually buy more from you because I can spend more on ads and sales will go up. So it's this relationship where you do have to build it over time. You do have to invest in the relationship. So some people at a certain size should go visit the manufacturer, understand the culture where you're going. And some Asian cultures, you bring gifts. So bring the gifts, like be appropriate, right? And invest in this relationship, because when they meet you, when you keep your word and then you say, look, I'm growing, but I could grow just a bit faster if I had a little bit of help from you here. This supplier did not take long to give a positive decision. Again, my client went there, and they did the cultural stuff that you should have done and all that. And we said, look, here's where we're going. Here's what the year looks like. Here's the new products that are coming. Here's the sales plan. And if you would consider holding some excess inventory, we could do such and such. And they were like, yeah, you know what? It's not a ton of money. We can do it. And so it's not like a law. They're not holding double the inventory, but they're holding some. And that actually makes it really, really helpful for us. Yeah.
I think what you're really getting at here is just the overall importance of establishing a really strong relationship with your manufacturers, right? 100%. Because you're saying it's like one third, just payment terms with them is like 1/3 of like the cash flow equation, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, and you can imagine, and if you put yourself in the shoes of a lot of Chinese or any Asian suppliers, even in South America, and you can imagine that it's like, they're getting these emails from the West saying, hey, I want this. When can you do it? When can you do it? How much is it? What's the cost? But imagine that you go there and you go, hey, thank you so much for this relationship. Here's who I am, and maybe meet my wife. And imagine the impact of just them knowing you, and it does make a difference, as we can see.
Yeah, I think a really big mistake that brands make, and hopefully, anyone that hasn't done this yet and gone to visit their manufacturers, they're taking notes on this. But that's probably one of the biggest mistakes you could make as a brand, is not going to visit your manufacturer.
Yeah, no, well, this is the thing. And so we advise when you get to a certain scale and you can afford it, make the trip.
If you don't go visit your manufacturer, How do you know that they're not just manufacturing for your competitors and just making it easy for your competition to undercut you?
Until you get to 10, 20 million or so, like you don't have a ton of negotiation power with these big manufacturers. So are they going to manufacture for your competitors? I mean, maybe, but this is the relationship piece. If you have a strong relationship, maybe you can hedge some of that stuff. Yeah.
What about like seasonal fluctuations? How do you typically approach that with your clients?
Yeah, good question. And Taylor Holiday from Common Thread just posted something about this recently. This part of the conversation layers in a little bit with the debts that you use. So I'll talk about them both just a bit. Of course, Taylor mentioned that e-commerce is quite seasonal rather. And so can some of your roles be more seasonal than permanent? Sure. I didn't read this whole thing, but it's a good point. One of the things I've seen is people spend hard in an off season and it's not efficient, So can you redirect your spend to something like top of funnel? Could you slow it down in an off season? And I know a couple of brands that do slow down their spend in off seasons and they retain cash generally well, right? And so we recommend planning your spend for off seasons. We recommend forecasting your CAC because what you can do is if you can measure it monthly, you can actually see the seasonality in your CAC. We obviously recommend, the CTC 4 peaks model. Like if you can have 4 different sales periods in a year, or maybe not sales as in discounts, but like demand gen periods, we would recommend trying to have a few more peaks in there. And then sometimes though, you just eat shit for a quarter and that's what you have to do. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, right? And so then the discussion is, how do you use debt effectively? Well, this is another cash flow issue, I guess, is people take a lot of times that really high repayment debt. So like Shopify Capital, the effective interest rates can be upwards of 30%. And it's rough, right? And they give you it's like an 11% fee and you pay it back at this percentage of sales. But when you look at it, it's 30%, right? And you pay it back in 4 months, which is really fast and it sucks. And so what happens is with Shopify Capital, and a lot of times you buy your inventory with Shopify Capital and you're already paying it back before you can even sell the inventory. And so it's not matched very well with its purpose. One of the ways you would match it better is using Shopify for ad spend, because you spend $1, you get hopefully 2 to 3 back in 30 days. And then you can use that 2 to 3 to pay the capital. When you look at inventory purchasing, use somebody like SellersFi is a good one, because they have 12 to 15 month terms. Or you could use SBA, but really match that term as much as you can. But I mean, with seasonality, can you reduce your workforce? Can you reduce your spend? Those are the things we try to, can you let your inventory sell down? Things like that. So you don't have cash locked away in things.
Right. I'm sure that's a pretty big obstacle, right? Is like trying to forecast how much inventory you need for BFSCM, right? But also like trying to keep those inventory levels as low as possible while still being able to, sell product throughout the year. Any advice there?
Yeah. So last year, the advice to people was, don't worry as much about selling out as you are about keeping too much. And other smart people have said this, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he's out there somewhere. And he said, keeping too much inventory is like a silent killer of e-com businesses. And I 100% agree. Again, you're taking bags of cash and you're putting them on a shelf.
Right, because you can't expense it.
Yeah, well, you can't do anything with so you need to get the cash back. And so again, low moving SKUs, cut them. Like if they don't make up more than 10% of sales, cut that shit. Like it's obviously not what people want from you, so cut it. And this year, I don't have a strong opinion on whether you should sell out or keep too much. It's early. It seems like demand is coming back in a pretty big way. And so when the economy is like that, sometimes it's okay to keep a bit extra, because if you don't sell it that month, you'll sell it next. Last year was a little scary. So what my advice was, allow yourself to sell out when you have to. We put someone on pre-sales, and if you have a strong product, pre-sales worked quite well. They were running their pre-sales on a ROAS of 4 or 5, and then in stock was 6, 7. So if you have a great product in a community and all that, and your marketing's on point, pre-sales can work.
So I want to go back to what you said earlier about having your cost of goods sold to be, 30% of the sale price. You're basically saying that your profit margins need to be 20% higher now than 2 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially, yes. Yeah.
And so for your clients, how are you approaching that? Is it, hey, let's see if we can get the landed cost of our products lower? Are we increasing pricing? What are some tactics you guys have had?
Better planning, ship by sea, right? That's the first one. If you ship by plane, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. The other one is, it is a real shitty process looking for new suppliers, but sometimes you find gold at the end of that rainbow. And I will say, for 2 people I've worked with, there was a pot of gold at the end of a really shitty process, and they went their cost of goods from 50 to 30%. And they have a healthy business now. So you can use brokers sometimes for that. You can look yourself, but again, shop some tech packs out there, and can you do some materials engineering? Can you find a cheaper material without sacrificing quality? And again, a terrible process, but I do recommend doing it here and there.
It's better than the alternative, which is to increase your prices to make up the difference.
Yeah. Well, and then on that, I mean, and the reason I say this, I've changed my tune a bit from a couple of years ago, is just that I've seen the relative stress level of those that have a 50% cost of goods, those of a 30. It's just easier to run the business on 30. It's tough on 50 right now because of the way CPMs and everything's going. But yeah, price increases, if you've never raised your prices, I mean, you should. I, at this point, have never seen a reasonable price increase met with a decline in demand yet. I've not seen it, not once. And I've worked with 4 or 5 brands that raised their prices by 10% year on year or so. I worked with one brand that introduced a new product that was double the price of their old one, and it fucking took off because they really understood what their customers wanted.
I kind of noticed this, that you traditional brick and mortar retail, you're seeing price increases every time you walk in the store, right?
Yeah,
but e-commerce brands, they're like, oh no, I'm too scared. People won't buy it from me.
I think, when in e-commerce, everyone is a click away from your competitor. I get why there's fear there, but I've just never seen, again, a reasonable price increase. I've never seen it met with a decline in demand.
I can say that I have recommended it to one client and it made no difference at all.
Yeah.
And so if for whatever reason you do see a decline in demand, I mean, you can always go back to what it was before, totally. Worst case. And hopefully, too many people didn't get offended by it.
Well, and the other thing you can do, the last thing I'll say on pricing, is the perceived value, because everything is bought. There's a tangible value to a t-shirt, but there's a perceived value to a Nike t-shirt over just a what do you call it, JCPenney or one of those kind of things, like just some off-label whatever. So can you work on the perceived value? Can you ship something in a nicer box? Sometimes that helps. Can you align your messaging with what your customers care about? Sometimes that helps. There's a bunch of ways to increase the perceived value of a product. And then you can raise the price and people will pay it, because for other reasons than a t-shirt, you need to wear it to be warm, There's also something to be said about the fact that the perceived value of your products might be higher than what you're charging and you just don't even know it. Yeah, exactly. And we had somebody that also did a lot of competitor analysis, quite regularly, and I hadn't seen that much, but they did competitor analysis all the time, and so they knew what everyone was charging, and they knew when the prices went up and all this stuff. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about debt. You mentioned some solutions there. What about just traditional lines of credit? Is that something that you're typically recommending your clients to do? Yeah, when people can get them 100%. The holdup for a lot of e-com brands is nobody wants to give up a personal guarantee. And when you go to a bank and you ask for a line of credit, there's always a personal guarantee. So I would say, if you size the debt appropriately, meaning if you're doing 2 million a year, don't go get a line of credit for $1 million, right? But if you keep it reasonable and you match the use of the line of credit with an appropriate use in your business, I think it's a great strategy. Why? Because you're going to pay 9-10% for a line of credit, maybe even 8 actually right now, where Shopify's 30% and you pay back in 4 months. But a line of credit is going to be 8% and you only pay the interest until you, like, let's say, for example, there's somebody who buys a shipment of wedding rings and it's 500 grand. If they buy it with Shopify Capital, they're going to pay 560 grand in the next 4 months. But if they pay the line of credit, they're going to be able to buy the inventory, sell through it all, use the margin of the inventory to pay back the line of credit and pay a marginal amount of interest. So it can be a very, very good strategy if your brand can get one. And to get one, you have to be profitable.
Yeah, and you're better off to get one of those in place when things are good.
Oh my God! Yes, thank you that you said that. Yes, of course. So always go get money when you don't need it. Right? Go get that line of credit if you don't fucking need it. That's the best time to do it because the banks, all they want is their money back, and the easiest way for them to know they're going to get their money back is if you have enough money right now to pay it back. Right? So it just makes the decision so much easier. So yes, 100% good call out, Tanner.
So is there like a good like percentage of annual sales that you should kind of be like aiming for with a line of credit? Something like what, 20, 30%?
The way that I would pitch it to people is that you would look at it in terms of your average inventory level. So if you have to hold an average of 300,000 throughout the year, that would be your line of credit amount typically. And then those spikes, so it's like, oh shit, I got to buy an extra 100,000 before Black Friday. You can use Shopify for those. That's a relatively safe strategy. But your base amount, that like the stuff that you always have is 300 grand. Use line of credit for that, and then cycle through it. Even better if you get a term loan for the 300 grand, but not everyone likes those and whatever. But yeah, that base amount would be your line of credit. The spikes you can use Shopify, Wayflyer, what have you.
Well, I'm glad there are people in this world that love numbers as much as you do. Dude, my wife is going to school to be an accountant right now, and I'm just like, what? I can't wrap my head around it, but she loves numbers. So it's always interesting to just see, just how diverse we are as humans, and you love numbers, I love being creative. But that's why I like marketing, because it's like a combination of the two, right? I get to be data driven and I get to be a little bit creative at the same time. So Matt, what are your secrets to scale?
Stay lean as long as you can. So don't ramp those fixed costs and those staff members and the rent and shit too early. Stay lean. I would say really understand your customers and what they want and what they might want. And then I would say testing. So work with an agency that understands the numbers and that is willing to do testing. So test your creative, test your offer, test your landing pages. And again, this is a bit outside of my lane, but what I see out there is that the brands that are willing to test and accept best practice before maybe they fully understand it are the ones that see a bit of success.
All really great advice. Thanks, Matt. And thank you for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think might benefit the audience?
Well, I mean, if they need any help with anything, we have some free tools on our site and on LinkedIn. I'm constantly posting videos and tools and stuff. So if they needed something and they comment on LinkedIn, typically I can make something for them. We are in the process of making a community, but it's not ready. So there's nothing there. But I would say, yeah, LinkedIn, like just if you want to ask questions or be in touch, LinkedIn is great for that. And we send free tools out all the time. Cool.
Awesome, man. Well, anyone listening, we'll leave a link to Matt's website as well as his LinkedIn so you guys can get in touch. And thank you again, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.